basically I'll be providing an overview of the youth programming that the Center for Public Engagement with Science has been conducting around the topic of resilience. And then I'll turn it over to Kathleen, and she's going to talk about the research piece in our current NSF-funded program. So empowering youth to contribute to climate change resilience efforts in their communities. As many of you on the call know, for many years, I led a youth engagement program called the Climate Leadership and Energy Awareness Program. And in 2017, we kind of pivoted that program a bit to start offering more resilience. So I'm going to tell you about that program and then our new program today. This is a picture of high school students in Climate Leap who were contributing to a service learning project at the Carolina campus community garden. And I just love that photo. So they were learning about sustainable agriculture and the role of local community gardens in food resilience, resilient food systems. So let's see, I want to start, hopefully I can advance. I'm having trouble advancing. There we go. So I thought we would just start. I know we have a lot of people on in the meeting here who are kind of, they know about resilience, but I thought it would just be interesting to capture your responses to the question, what is climate resilience? And this is a picture from Lumberton after one of the recent hurricanes. So maybe in the chat box, take a moment and just say what you think climate resilience is. Many of you participated in Phil Burke's talk 2 weeks ago, so you already know about this, but there's lots of different definitions. Let's see if anyone's doing it. No one's participating. There we go. Ability to adapt to issues, recovering from disaster. So this is one thing we do with our students, is get them thinking about what is climate resilience. And that's becoming easier with students now that many of us have these lived experiences that we can draw from to make these definitions. Sarah Peach, thanks for joining us, Sarah. The capacity to bounce back after an extreme weather event, ability to respond to climate impacts, capacity for socio-ecological recovery, absorb stresses, great. So these are all things that we want to teach our students. And I'm having trouble, there we go. So there are many definitions. This is one definition that I like, that I think captures some of the work that's happening at the university. Climate resilience is the ability to anticipate, prepare for, and respond to hazardous events, trends, or disturbances related to the climate. So many of you do modeling work, for instance. So I think one thing we want to convey to people is that climate resilience is not just bouncing back, but it's preparing for, planning for, anticipating these events. So I think that's a big piece that we're really trying to show youth, and this is a way to feature the research that's happening, within the university and across the country. And this is an image here that I think a lot of people can respond to and see how these houses on stilts represent one strategy for resilience. Oh, I don't know what just happened. Let's go back. So I thought this would be an interesting way to engage with you all this morning. I've been thinking a lot about this in response to COVID. What COVID responses are we seeing that are cultivating community resilience? And we're also seeing responses that are kind of isolating people and not contributing to resilience. But I thought we could, in the chat box, or feel free to unmute yourself and speak, but what lessons are we learning from COVID-19 that can actually shape our climate resilience strategies? And I like, there was an article that came out earlier in the pandemic. The coronavirus has been called, with some justification, a slow motion hurricane. So one thing that we're going to be doing with our youth in our new program is really helping them to draw those parallels between the COVID-19 response and disaster response. Let me check the chat box here. The racial and socioeconomic justice. One thing I'm seeing is the need to feed people, right? So we're seeing food banks, community gardens, victory gardens. That's becoming one response that we're seeing to cultivate community resilience. We're also seeing our schools adopt strategies to help them become more resilient so that their students can learn remotely, for instance. Sarah writes, learning from your neighbors, becoming aware of community resources.
Dana,
Yeah.
Javier Bastos here. The other thing on the flip side is sort of how are we taking in the science, which is kind of
Yes.
interesting.
Yeah.
You know, in terms of like either the people that are going scientifically, this is what we have to do, and the people that are just sort of like backlashing against that. And I can see that being a parallel to climate change.
Definitely, like dealing with uncertainties. So how, yeah, because in both cases there are a lot of uncertainties, right? And sometimes people see even the uncertainty among scientists as meaning that scientists don't know what they're doing, but really it's just there's always going to be some inherent uncertainty, and having respect for that. People don't realize sometimes that hurricane models, for instance, there's still a lot of uncertainty around that, but we still board up our houses and evacuate. So yeah, I think that's a really good point. And Sarah Peach writes, free, share, bartering economy at the neighborhood scale. Good. And then like, does
Dana,
that, yes.
just following up on Javier's comment, I think that the pandemic is showing us our weaknesses in
Yes.
such real time, right? And then we're developing these responses, such as teaching. Any of us who are teachers, whether it be formal K-12 or college, or even in your community, have seen the ways the tried and true methods are completely challenged right now, right? So we're developing these quick responses, and I think we are going to the fast and easy sometimes without figuring out what is really going to work. And so that is an interesting challenge for everyone on the call who is an educator.
Yeah, definitely. We're seeing the weaknesses being exposed, not just with schools, but with our public health system, for instance, and these weaknesses are going to also have to be addressed in terms of climate change.
I think also people just want definitive answers and get frustrated when they don't have those. Like the WHO saying that people that don't have symptoms are not going to, you know, they're not as contagious. And then experts coming back and counteracting that, saying, no, we don't agree with this. And people are like, oh my gosh, what are we supposed to believe? And it's like, this is the scientific process, and it's hard to, you know, for the general public to accept that.
Yes, I think so. And that's definitely something we try to do in our youth programming, is try to kind of convey that the nature of scientific inquiry and respect for the process. And then to showcase people who are doing the science on the ground. And not just the, you know, the established researchers, but their graduate students and even undergraduates, to try to show all the different types of people working on this research to make it more real and meaningful.
And this is something our team focuses on quite a bit in our partnerships with faculty, is science communication and effective science communication. And in this moment, we see even more why it's so important to be able to talk about your research in understandable ways.
Yes, definitely. Good discussion. I imagine many of you have already been thinking about this, but it's been exciting for me to think about how we can merge this current event with climate change to really engage diverse youth and make it all relevant. So like I mentioned, oh, go ahead.
Oh, no, I just wanted to say, you said relevant. I think, you know, environmental justice and race relations are certainly relevant.
Yes, totally. Yes, and that's been a part of our work too for decades, like environmental justice and educating people what that means, et cetera. We've been doing youth programming since 2009, and that was climate change oriented youth programming. We talked about climate and energy and sustainability. Increasingly, we're moving in to talk about resilience. Many of you are familiar with our youth programs. We have a number of them. Now we have one on energy. We've had some on increasing diversity in the geosciences. These are some hallmarks here of all of our youth programming that we conduct at the Institute. So typically they're long duration programs, meaning we see them for many contact hours, perhaps over the course of a year, student-centered. meaning we try to really get students engaged, but let them direct some of the content that we do as well. Aligning our content to educational standards, both at the state and national levels, as much as often hands-on STEM-based activities, focusing on solutions, being place-based and local, so using local data, getting students outdoors to perhaps collect local data, meeting people who are doing research in their communities. And then many of our programs too also have an action-oriented piece where students take what they're learning and take something back to their community, whether it's their school community or their family environment.
You know, if I could ask you a quick question. I wanted to start a phenology project with my school, and I was thinking of using Nature's Notebook. Are you familiar with them at all?
A little bit. Sarah on the call is probably more familiar with Nature's Notebook.
Okay.
But yeah, and Project Budburst is also, I don't know if you're familiar with that. That's a great
I've heard of them.
phenology. Yeah, that's a great phenology tool. And then I See Change is another citizen science app that also is wanting to document phenology changes. But I would say reaching out to Sarah Yelton, who's on the call, would be, she'll be a great resource for you.
Yeah, I'd be happy to talk to you more about any of those citizen science projects, Javier.
So when we talk about resilience with youth, I kind of adopted an approach that I think I initially saw the Kresge Foundation take, and it was helping people understand kind of these three facets of resilience, which was climate mitigation, so identifying and evaluating local mitigation strategies in the community, and also thinking about the human health benefits of climate mitigation strategies, climate adaptation, so having youth learn about how we're planning and preparing for climate impacts. This is a student here learning about green roof technology at UNC, for instance. And then also community capacity building. So how do we foster social networks and inclusion? How do we address climate justice issues, for instance? So when we've done resilience-focused programming, we've tended to develop and implement activities that touch on all of these. One program that we did in 2017, it was an extension of the Climate Leadership and Energy Awareness program that I had run for many years. We had a no-cost extension, and we also got supplemental funds from NIEHS to do a resilience-focused youth programming, and we did it in partnership with Columbia University, their Environmental Health Science Core Center, also We Act for Environmental Justice, and then we also partnered at UNC with the Center for Environmental Health and Susceptibility, and also the Alliance for Climate Education. So it was a really big program. We ran these parallel youth programs in both New York and North Carolina, focused around resilience and environmental health, particularly climate and health impacts. And by having these community partners, we were able to bring in a little bit more advocacy-oriented programming and climate justice-oriented programming as well. And let me tell you, environmental, I kind of said this. And we also asked the youth to do community-based action projects. So this was kind of our foray into doing resilience-focused youth programming. We did evaluate that program like we evaluate all of our programs. And this is just one result. Youth felt more prepared to participate in resilience building activities in their community as a result of this year-long program. And here's just some of that data there. These are some of the skills that we tried to build in our youth during the program: identifying community assets and vulnerabilities, analyzing climate impacts to their community, and then identifying and evaluating adaptation strategies. So this program then helped us to build towards our current program, which is an NSF-funded program. This is our Youth Engaging in the Science of Resilience Teen Climate Ambassadors program. We're running this program in concert with the North Carolina Museum of Natural Sciences, which is based out of Raleigh. They also have a satellite campus in Whiteville, North Carolina, which is about an hour west of Wilmington. So rural, kind of coastal community, not immediately on the coast, but there is an inland waterway there, so they're going to be dealing with inland flooding issues, for instance. What we're going to be doing is engaging youth in both Whiteville and Raleigh. We're going to try to get 16 to 20 youth, and we are pivoting our program to be virtual. We're going to be doing citizen and community science approaches to engage students. We're going to be preparing the students to develop and implement resilience building action projects. And we're also going to be taking all the activities we do with the students and building a resilience curricula that informal science centers and environmental education centers across North Carolina could use to engage teenagers in resilience building activities in their community. And so we're going to be introducing our students to the variety of climate impacts that North Carolina is seeing. I believe these are all pictures from North Carolina here, from flooding to drought, the wildfire to extreme heat, to storm surge, to sea level rise. I mean, I think probably everyone on the call knows about these impacts. We'll be learning about the impacts, but we'll be spending a lot of time looking at solutions that promote resilience. And that's going to be looking at solutions that have been or are being implemented, solutions that are being debated, and it's also going to provide room for thinking about the role of innovation in developing new solutions and how we can empower youth to be a part of that innovation. And then we're hoping youth will pick on one of these climate impacts that's particularly interesting to them and develop either a service project or an educational project that can build resilience within their community. And we are planning to have them engage with local government officials and other people who are really working on the ground to become more resilient. We'll be tapping into the new state resilience plan as well as local resilience plans as well. We are using the the U.S. Climate Resilience Toolkit and the framework that they've outlined in terms of the steps to community resilience, which you can see here on the top left. We're going to be walking students through these for a variety of climate impacts. Here's a picture of our 2017 students looking at extreme heat. And if you can read that, you can see they were listing here adaptation strategies to extreme heat in New York City, where they have high rises, which kind of complicates a lot of extreme heat issues. We're going to be walking students through a very similar process here. And what's going to come of that is we're going to be developing 5 curriculum modules that would walk users through these steps of the Climate Resilience Toolkit. And again, these modules will be available to environmental education centers and other museums and science centers across the state. And so we are seeking ideas for action projects, and that's where some of you come in. Maybe some of you have research projects that could benefit from the work of really motivated high school students, or maybe you know others working in this resilience realm. These are pictures of some of our students doing service projects, whether it's educational projects, running campaigns, all kinds of things. These are some of the topics we're thinking students will particularly be interested in. So looking at agriculture and resilience, the built environment, ecosystems, energy, human health, water, and transportation. So we're going to be trying to find projects that they can get directly involved in and to become part of the solution to help communities become more resilient. And these are going to take place in both the Raleigh area, and that includes not just Raleigh, but surrounding counties. So we're expecting to have students from Durham, Orange, Chatham, Alamance counties, for instance, as well. And then the Whiteville region also. And I think that's it for me. So this current program we're very excited about. It is a collaboration between the North Carolina Museum of Natural Sciences, and that was one of the big kind of reasons for the NSF funding, was to support this collaboration and to engage both urban and rural students on learning about climate change and climate resilience. And this is building off of our previous work, which was funded by the Borough's Welcome Fund. So I'm going to stop there. I guess I'll take any immediate programming questions, and then I'll turn it over to Kathleen, who's going to talk to you more about the research aspect of the Yes Resilience program. Any questions? And you can feel free to unmute yourself or
This
your
is
question
Phil
into the chat box.
This is
Hi,
Phil Burt. Oh, you can hear me. I'm on my iPhone. So, do you when you work with the students, are you kind of developing curriculum for the high schools too? I know you're developing modules, but are they picking it up, and do they ever get a chance to come back to the university? I'm wondering, do they get exposed?
Well, we in the past we've run these programs, out of UNC, so they've been on campus, and that's been great. And the students love that, especially the ones who live in Chapel Hill and drive by these buildings all the time and have no idea what's happening inside the walls of the buildings. So we do get them on campus, and we're certainly hoping to do that for Yes Resilience. We'll just have to see if we're going to be able to meet in person, and even if we can meet in person, it might have to be outdoors. And so that's why it's going to be important to us to try to engage virtually with scientists and trainees and others.
Yes.
In terms of curriculum, most of our work, we do curriculum development for the formal K-12 classroom. This grant is really more for the informal science learning environment, but that's not to say we don't align the content to the standards. But I think because it's informal learning, we have the opportunity to move beyond the standards and really introduce students to cutting edge research topics and careers. So I hope that answers your question. I think people with, me and people within the Center for Public Engagement with Science we kind of straddle both realms a lot in terms of informal and formal, and we are well aware of the science curriculum standards. And when we can, we like to extend beyond that, in part because the standards are about 10 years old now, and they're really not reflecting all the research you all are doing on the ground. And so I think that's something that makes the work particularly rewarding for me, is to be able to bring that current science to students.
Thank you.
Does that answer your question?
Yes.
Okay. Anything else? I'll just say we are going to probably be reaching out to many of you to be potential guest speakers, or to review curriculum that we develop, or to introduce us to your amazing students who are working with you. I should have said a big part of this current program is to engage females and minorities underrepresented in STEM careers to the extent possible. So we're hoping to have diverse cohorts of students. And also we want to feature diverse scientists and other resilience professionals on the ground. So keep that in mind if we reach out to you as well, as we're really trying to showcase the diversity within the field, but also the need for diversity in terms of solving these problems. So thanks. I think I'll turn it over to Kathleen now. So let me stop sharing.
Okay, good morning, everyone. Let me get my slides up here. Okay, so as Dana said at the beginning, I'm going to talk about the research side of this project, because this is an NSF-funded project. So those of you who know Dana and the members of our team who do K-12 education know that they are identified as leaders, not just in the state, but in the country. We have a robust K-12 environmental science education program, and I'm really proud of the work this team does. You can do a lot of great programming and not be clear on what the impacts are of that programming. And that's where the research, where both evaluation and research come in. So a little bit of context for this work. So there's a whole field of learning referred to as informal science learning, and that is everything that happens outside of school. So even clubs, school clubs that occur outside of the school day are sometimes considered informal science learning. That one is the trickiest one, but certainly visiting science museums. Scouting incorporates science a lot of the time. There are many different kinds of activities, even watching PBS or listening to a nature story, reading a book about nature. That's all informal science learning. So some research suggests that up to 50% of the science that we learn about happens outside of school settings. And these informal science learning contexts have been shown to potentially be available to more learners than formal science education. I say potentially because think about your favorite nature center, for those of you who go to state parks and nature centers. Those aren't always as diverse in terms of who's coming to them as they could be, but hypothetically they are open to more people than, say, college level science education. And we've definitely seen, with dedicated support from NSF, NIH, and a host of private funders, research that has shown that we can better engage youth and women, groups who are underrepresented youth in the sciences and women students, we can better engage them in informal settings than waiting, counting on them making it to that college science classroom. So this funding that we have for the Yes Resilience Project is specifically from NSF to support pilot projects to better understand the effective approaches to informal science learning. So we have a 2-year project in partnership with the museum, as Dana said, and we hope that we will show outcomes that not only inform how to best conduct this kind of education, but that set us up for a much bigger program. So with research, we're conducting research in partnership with the School of Education and Rita O'Sullivan in particular. And we've got 3 questions that we are asking. And I'm going to talk most about this first question. So to what extent does youth participation in museum-led, resilience-focused programming lead to knowledge, skills, self-efficacy that support resilience? I'm going to break that question down in a minute. The other 2 questions are more straightforward. What program features foster the particular outcomes we're looking for? And how do outcomes differ between rural and urban youth? So that first question that I said I was going to break down a bit more. Sorry, I got to move some things on my screen so they're not in the way. So knowledge, any of you who teach, whether it's K-12, college environment, even informal, you have lots of tools for assessing your learners' knowledge. They range from tests to concept maps to just asking people, what did you learn? So we're pretty familiar with various ways to assess knowledge, but in the informal space, we have to be more creative because people aren't coming to a nature center to be tested or even to learn. So there are some challenges to assessing knowledge. Dana talked about some of the skills that we'll be assessing. And then there's this other piece, self-efficacy, right? So what is self-efficacy? Let me give you an example. So drawing on theory, social cognitive behavioral theory, and also the theory of planned behavior, self-efficacy can be thought of in 2 chunks. One is my belief in my ability to take an action. And the other part, outcome expectancy, is my belief in what will happen because I take that action. So for instance, when you think about voting, I may know where to vote. I may know who the candidates are and what they represent, or believe that I can figure that out. Where do I go vote? Who do I want to vote for? Whose platforms align with my beliefs? So I may have a pretty high sense of self-efficacy related to voting. But if I think the system is corrupt, then I may have a low outcome expectancy. So I think I know how to vote, I can vote, but voting isn't going to make a difference. If I hold that belief, I am then less likely to go vote. So we're going to be asking about self-efficacy in the context of environmental action. So what's your self-efficacy for environmental action? So one way to do this, earlier in the conversation, we were talking about citizen science projects. And again, there's a whole body of literature around what's effective in citizen science. And the Cornell Lab of Ornithology has been a real leader in terms of helping us to understand and evaluate the impact of citizen science. So they've developed a number of scales, including a self-efficacy for environmental action scale. And we're going to use this tool with the youth who participate in our program. So you can see one example of a question that they might pose, right? I can contribute to solutions to environmental problems by my actions. So we would pose this question to the students, to the youth, and then they would choose one of these 5 answers. And there are actually dozens of questions that we might choose from, but just to help you understand the research side of things a little more. So here's another one. In the same subset of questions, I don't think I can make any difference. So really, these are a positive and a negative. It's referred to as reverse coding, so that I would ask a statement that's ask you to respond to a statement stated in the affirmative, and then I would ask it again posed as a negative, and that is just a validity check within the scale. So if your views were consistent, you would respond to the first one. I might, for instance, respond strongly agree to the first one and strongly disagree to the second one. So besides trying to get at certain core concepts, we're also trying to test to make sure that our instrument is even valid. So then here's another question from the scale. I believe that I personally, working with others, can help solve environmental problems. And this one is interesting because if you look at that first question, I can contribute. It talks about my belief. Well, maybe I would answer that one as uncertain. I don't really know if I make a difference. But this one, I might say, oh, if I work with lots of other people, it will make a difference. So think about turning the lights off and on. Maybe you think using the most efficient lights in my home doesn't really make a difference. But if every single person across the country did, we would have a great impact. And really, we can think about that with greenhouse gas emissions, right? So it's possible that you might not feel as strongly about your individual action, but working with others, you might feel more strongly about. Another example of these kinds of questions is this one we say, compared to other people, I can make a positive impact. And you could answer that in the affirmative or negative for a lot of reasons. You could think, if you live in a community like Chapel Hill, where you have access to more resources, perhaps you have the potential to make more of a positive impact. You could just feel like as an individual, maybe you feel more or less empowered. So this one, you might answer it a certain way for different reasons, but I hope you can see that with each of these questions, they seem very similar except for the positive negative wording, but really they're getting at different aspects of what helps someone know that they can take an environmental action. So at the end of the project, we're gonna better understand for the participating youth what knowledge they came in with related to community resilience, the skill set that they had, and then their sense of self-efficacy. And because it's a year-long program, we will see changes in all these things, but especially self-efficacy. You would not expect to see a change in self-efficacy from the morning that you started a workshop and 4 hours later. So for self-efficacy, you would really expect it to take up to a year. It could happen over a couple months, but it takes time. You're not going to see it over the course even of teaching a unit in school, for instance. So we're excited that we have a year to look at how does self-efficacy change for these youth. And then we're also going to be excited to see, are there differences between the rural and the urban youth? And I think that's my last slide. So I'm going to stop sharing and just open it up to questions about the research, questions about the programming overall, any discussion that we have.
Quick question: is there another way to assess self-efficacy aside from a self-reporting?
That's an interesting question. All of the self-efficacy work that I have either done or been part of is individual assessment. However, I have colleagues, that's not true. I have colleagues at University of Kentucky in the health sciences. Self-efficacy is looked at quite a bit in the nursing community. And so there you might have instructors who observe, for instance. So they see those nursing students as they're engaging with patients with asthma, and they see how effective they are at communicating and shepherding people to positive action. So you can do some observation, but remember, fundamentally, it's my belief in my ability, not necessarily your assessment of my ability. So it is defined as an individual concept because it's about what prompts us as individuals to change our behavior.
And related to that, is there any way to use social media to also inform that?
Oh, that's a good question. And I think we should think about that. And I am always trying to think about how to use social media for good. So as versus other ways. So I don't have an answer to that, Javier, but I'm going to think about that. I'll say this. So this is all off the cuff. But I do find that there's so much curation of self in the social media world, right? I'm putting out the person I want you to see me as opposed to potentially how I perceive myself. So I think there's a lot of opportunity for conflict in using social media to assess. That said, this is the beautiful thing about exploration, right? We could look at, and we may want to in this project, look at youth leaders, I'll call them for now, on social media, Greta, for instance, right? But youth who are recognized as leading in the space of climate change or resilience, and see what they're posting when, what responses they get for self-efficacy, it would have to be something like their post and then their response after people comment, right? Because we're looking at self. I would say with the current Black Lives Matter movement, we can really see people respond, people putting content out and getting either affirmation or castigation, right? And then the initial poster changing their response in some way. So I mean, maybe that's an imperfect mirror for how our actions influence what we're doing, but it's a completely different realm. So I would just say, let's think about how we can use social media to get a sense of what youth want to do and what they're taking action on, maybe more so than focusing it down on their self-efficacy.
I do think we'll get some information about self-efficacy from the extent to which students conduct action projects maybe, and how the action projects, especially for those of them who maybe previously weren't doing action projects and they start doing them, or they weren't doing social media and now they start using social media as an education tool. So I'm hoping we could get some insight based on what they do with the information they learn in our program. And I'm thinking that some students might choose to do some kind of educational campaigns using social media, for instance, like putting out daily tips about something. So it'll be interesting to see what they do with their action projects, and then how we could use that to contribute to our understanding of their self-efficacy being developed by the program.
Yeah, and the action projects are really interesting in this study because there's so much evidence that adolescents are influenced by peers. And so the opportunity for them to work on group projects. I mean, people may choose individual projects, but Dana and Sarah are also working with our community partners to set up small projects where maybe 2 or 3 or 4 students could work together. And it will be interesting to see what kinds of projects people choose, how many students are part, and how that's connected to outcomes.
Mm-hmm. And I'll just give you, since we have time, I mean, one example, one thing I'd love to hear from some of you is ideas for, programming, but also action project ideas. And I'll just throw out one example of maybe a dream project. Would be looking at, say, extreme heat in Raleigh. I think the state climate office is trying to get funding to map the extreme heat environment in Raleigh, like in terms of which parts of the city are most vulnerable to extreme heat. But it would be interesting then for our students to learn about, the human health effects of extreme heat exposure, but who's vulnerable. Like, for instance, in Raleigh, the homeless population in downtown Raleigh might be a vulnerable population. And then what solutions could Raleigh implement to protect those? Like in Phoenix, I think they're passing out umbrellas, for instance, to homeless people to provide them with shade on really hot days. And the umbrellas could have messaging on them. So youth could put forward some solutions and take them to the city council and present them to the city council. So that would be like a wonderful outcome of this program. Or likewise, doing something about schools and how can schools become more resilient in response to flooding, for instance, and then take their ideas to the school board or to the county commissioners and try to get that to happen. So we are looking for civic engagement opportunities for the youth, and we really want them thinking about real problems and real solutions. And high school students are capable of this work. They are technologically savvy. They are motivated by wanting to have awesome college applications and essays. There are awards out there for students who do amazing things in their communities. So that's where we would love to tap into you all for ideas of how your research could be supported by a youth project, an individual or a team project. So please, feel free to offer your ideas now or just keep us in mind.
My name is Maple. I just got on. I stayed up too late, and I have an MED from somewhere else, and I'm 65, so I pretty much stopped teaching, although I am certified still right now, but they kind of overlook once you're over 35, so keep your good jobs, But I'm just the word resilient, I mean, the word resilience, even an adaptation, still kind of makes me cringe, but it's a necessary piece because there's no reversal, right? I mean, I learned how bad climate crisis is 8 years ago in Arizona. I lived there, and a bunch of engineers explained to me about the ocean happened to absorb the heat and everything from the other IPCC report. But I'm sometimes worried that youth just accept, like a lot of adults, you know, and Greta came on the scene and said, wake up, but oh, well, it's going to happen, you know, rather than directing them to still mitigation efforts. So I'm in mitigation all day, every day, weekends included. I mean, you know, I came down here 5 years ago. I've been in North Carolina, but there's pipeline. There's people that are a little shy about being on the streets because people are afraid because the riot police show up, right? So that's a crisis, but we still do have those rights. So I'm out there, and the sunrise is pretty mellow. They do a lot of organizing behind the computers, but not totally. There's Extinction Rebellions, all ages. So there's NC Warren, right in based in Durham, North, you know, and they have youth groups for all the way down high school and up. They're doing a lot. So I'm wondering if you ever even direct young people or know about those groups where they can actually, because I bet they're out there with the resilience thinking, God, how can we just stop this, right? I mean, I bet they're hungry for really not only, oh, it's going to happen, but let's still prevent it from being worse. So I hope you direct and have those resources. If not, I can email you. I think I have your email.
Yeah, no, we are definitely aware of those resources, and we also have some other educators who are younger and perhaps more adept at some of the social media, and they are engaged in the kind of environmental justice, climate justice movement that's happening within our communities. We are certainly going to tap into some of those youth leaders to put them in front of our youth. So for instance, in Durham, there is a really, I think, outstanding high school student who started the Durham Youth Climate Justice Initiative. She just did a candlelight vigil for George Floyd last week in Durham. So I think getting her, maybe even getting her as an advisor, but definitely having the students meet her. That's going to be one benefit of our program being more virtual in response to COVID, is we're going to be able to connect with youth leaders across the country and the world.
She's under Aisha, I think it is. She's under NC Warren's umbrella, and they're nurturing those young people. Actually, they're behind those two. So they've been fighting Duke for 30 years, which is a big part of our problem. So.
Yeah, definitely. Any other ideas? We are I know some of you on the call do air quality modeling work. You know, we are hoping that we have the opportunity to have students collect air quality data using personal air quality sensors. If we can't do that, we'll have them look at local air quality data, maybe available through the Purple Air website, for instance. But I'd be interested to hear thoughts on air quality connections for youth, thinking about extreme heat and air quality, or wildfires and climate change and air quality, and if there might be any potential projects there for students.
Hey Dana, this is Saurav. Nice talk, very engaging. So on the air quality question, so do we have a budget to buy some sensors and deploy them with students' help?
We do have a budget. I mean, we do have, as you know, a set of air beams that are a little bit old now, but we could potentially still use those. And then I also have one pocket air device that I think has potential, and that's like, I think that's $299 a sensor. So we do have a budget to purchase some sensors. That was our intention. But now the challenge is, you know, how to get it into the hands of students if we can't see them. But there could be a pickup type situation where they swing by the museum and pick up and check out a sensor for a couple weeks. So we'll have to explore all of those. Kind of once we know, I'm hoping soon we'll kind of know what the lay of the land might be like for the fall in terms of the extent to which we might be able to see students in person. Yeah, does that answer your question?
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, we can explore some ideas and see what we could do. That sounds great.
Yeah, I think, I mean, I would love to have them looking at air quality in particular on extreme heat days, But also, you know, if we are in the situation where there's wildfire smoke, for instance, as well.
Okay.
And this question of sensors is especially important when you remember the context of this project as being informal science learning spaces. So we are hoping at the end of the project that we'll be making recommendations to the museum and to other environmental education and centers and nature centers across North Carolina about the kinds of tools that they could have on hand to help people learn about the local environment. So cost is really key. Even though we have funds here, we ultimately need to be thinking about tools that can be purchased on very small budgets by these environmental education and science centers.
Yeah, and one thing we could do, Kathleen, Dina, is train some of these students on these relatively simple web-based models that our group has developed, like the C-Tools family, and they can start to explore air quality in and around the region that they are working in, and then use that as a decision point to help decide where to put the sensors. Yeah. I think students may enjoy playing with these tools and then use that in sync with the sensors that we may purchase. I think there are some cool ideas we can explore and make the students more enjoy what they're doing.
Good, yeah, that's a great idea.
Yeah, that is a great idea. I could see some of them being interested in doing that. You know, as you know, a couple of years ago, I had one high school student. She worked around renewable energy and the health benefits from switching to renewable energy. And she looked at North Carolina air quality data in different emission scenarios. And she eventually got a presidential EPA award for her work. So there are certainly high school students who are looking for more robust science projects that could potentially be science fair projects as well. So that I think that there's really good potential for connecting to your work there as well.
Super. And one question, what is the timeline for this? Is this for 1 year starting this fall, or is it longer?
We've had funding since the fall of 2019. We were going to run our program starting in right now in June of 2020. We pushed that back. So now we're going to be starting with the students at the end of August virtually. And then we've outlined a year-long program that will culminate in a summer institute in June of 2021. So we'll have contact with the students every month between August and June. And then some of that contact will be more substantial in terms of a multi-day summer institute, for instance.
Super, thank you.
One thing we'll also be doing with the students that I'm excited about is there's an app that you can put on your phone called I See Change. It's a citizen science app. And they email, the organizers of that app email regular prompts out in response to, say, weather events. So they might say, hey, it's going to be really hot this weekend in North Carolina. Take a picture of extreme heat and what that looks like in your neighborhood, and you post it. And they cultivate climate stories around that. They're also using it for phenology, for instance. So we're going to be prompting the students regularly to get outside and make observations about extreme heat and flooding, and share that with each other in part so that the urban students can compare experiences with the rural students. I think that'll be a neat platform for engaging them. And so some of you might be interested in that as well. And we could even write prompts that might be relevant to your research too. So that's another idea to consider. We're hoping to kind of give them a monthly prompt, and some of those prompts might come right before a hurricane or an extreme heat event or an ice storm, whatever it might be.
I'm wondering, do you guys go as far as Robeson County? Because there's a lot of harmful projects down there and a lot of young people. There's the UNC there, right? There's that NC State, no, UNC in Pembroke.
Right. That might be too far for our program's open to anyone as long as they're willing to get to the museum for when we do have in-person programming. Megan Hughes on the call is leading a program in Robeson County for youth. So we certainly are working within that county under a different grant-funded project.
Oh, okay.
Megan, do you want to?
And Andrew, Joel,
And Andrew.
Andrew George is also working in Robeson County, not with youth, but with environmental organizations in Robeson County.
Because the museum was $350,000, but it said they wanted to reach out to rural students, especially, and try to get them engaged. That was looks like a big part of the grant. But it didn't say how far rural in North Carolina.
Any other questions? Comments, ideas?
Hey, Dana, this is Mike.
Hey.
How are you? That was
Good.
great. Thank you, and Kathleen, that was excellent. One other thing that I think would be great for that urban-rural comparison is thinking about stormwater. And some of our work in the collaboratory funded resilience project is mapping stormwater infrastructure. And I think that's a possibility for somewhere like Whiteville and somewhere like Raleigh, just given data availability. And it's a neat tool because students can then see exactly what stormwater is, where it's going, but also relate it back to flooding, because so often the stormwater infrastructure ends up full of water and you see flooding in places you wouldn't expect. So kind of connected to that, but also separate, I think having students just look and see where is flooding and identifying that and the degree to which it affects their activities could be a really interesting exercise. There's been obviously some of that before, but I'm unaware of a sort of urban-rural comparison in similar areas.
Yeah, and we're definitely going to be talking about stormwater. Unfortunately, our stormwater division at the state level has some really strong education, you know, an education team and curriculum tools. And there is there's an ArcGIS tool called Survey 123 that I'm just learning, where students can go out and actually, like you said, map places where they're seeing, you know, failed stormwater, for instance. So I think that we will definitely make that a piece of our project when we talk about stormwater. And again, students, those that are interested in GIS are going to be particularly interested, and we'll support them in developing projects around that. So they're definitely going to be learning about stormwater and solutions to minimize flooding. And they'll also probably learn about pricing of, you know, how the whole pricing tiers and things like that. So they'll be learning about the economic solutions as well.
I think it's interesting. I think these
Dana,
ideas
are
interesting too, with Saurav and Mike talking about the modeling existing data that's possible for students to look at, because both stormwater, air quality are phenomena that people don't really see or appreciate. And of course that underpins climate change as well. So I think the more we can help students see the environment and these impacts, it will position them to take action.
Yeah, definitely.
And our work gets cool. I'm sorry, go ahead, Javier.
Oh, no, please.
I'll just finish up. Our work gets cooler the closer you get to the coast, because it's contingent then on water levels in the receiving waters. And so that's both in terms of storms and sea level rise, so relevant. So we have these maps where you see the whole network and you use a little slider to raise water level and see how much of the network is inactivated by changes in water level, whether they be short-term or long-term.
Yeah, there's a lot of powerful visualizations. And like someone was saying, I mean, one part of our program is we have to engage students in the consequences of climate change. So we have to show them the impacts, right? And then that's going to hopefully motivate them to take action. So we do have to, we're going to be using those consequences to motivate them. And there certainly are a lot of them that we can address. And there's a lot of great data visualization tools, like you mentioned, to help make it real. With the NOAA sea level rise viewer, for instance, you can drill down to the street level and see impacts. So they could see their grandmother's house might be underwater, you know, after a hurricane. So those types of things are going to make it also really real for the students.
And Dana, what I wanted to chime in was that ArcGIS, I do use it, and looking at impervious surfaces and then overlaying that with flood data, but also looking at for, you know, obviously the comparison to rural to the urban, but also looking at what sort of ground cover you have in a rural setting and how that impacts that runoff.
Yes, definitely. We'll be looking at maps like that. One tool that we're planning to use with the students is EPA's Enviro Atlas. I don't know how many of you are familiar with that, but that's where they can create different map layers. So they could look at percent vegetation cover, for instance, land use, they can look at socioeconomic data, so they can make these different layers to help kind of think about these complex problems. And I think some of them, impervious surfaces too are something that are very visual, right? You can walk around the town and see the different impervious surfaces. Also think about urban heat island effect as well. There's another connection there. And so that topic lends itself well, I think, to getting students outside in their own communities, making observations.
I also think that, in ArcGIS, you just get a satellite picture of your local area, and then using a measuring tool, you can just kind of measure out the impervious surfaces and do a calculation. So that's always helpful too.
Yeah, we've done that with students where we had them measure like what 1 inch of rain over a parking lot, how much water that is, and then how big of a cistern would they need. And yeah, there's some great math connections there as well. The key is making it fun and not feel like school when you're doing it for an extracurricular youth program. But some of them will want to do that because they love math, and they love learning the tools behind the math. Great. We're almost out of time. Are there other questions, comments?
This is Brian Bryce. How are you?
Good. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, really enjoyed the back and forth. And this is just a comment for having 18, 16, and 14-year-olds at home.
Yeah.
They are very agitated about all of the racial injustice issues, both historical and current. And it's just been like an avalanche of information and feelings and emotions. And I don't know how to do it, but I'm just I'll say that if there's a way to implement some of the citizen science and educational opportunities with either private schools or parochial schools or other universities with inner city schools, whether it's Raleigh or Washington, D.C. or anywhere in between, to try to bring, I think that kids want to work together to solve problems and help break down barriers, whether they're environmental, socioeconomic, racial, whatever. And there's just opportunity. That's all I wanted to comment on, is that I feel like, just based on what's going on in my house, that there's opportunity for that kind of research to go on, that we sort of cross-pollinate rural and inner city and other types of divides with environmental research at the student level, whether it's middle school, high school, whether it's EPA, Department of Environmental Quality, UNC, Institute for the Environment, helping connect these different folks for environmental education.
Well, I'll say, Brian, that thank you for that. I agree. Having young people in my house too, you really see the ways that both the pandemic and the Black Lives Matter movement are affecting them. And I think that's one really exciting silver lining to the cloud of not being able to do our program in person as we had planned. By being forced to create a virtual version, we then hope to be able to spread it much farther and wider than we ever would have been able to do with the original program. So, and I also think we'll have more opportunity to be responsive and to incorporate youth input into the program than we might have if we had been doing it the way we initially planned.
Hey, Brian, good to see you.
Yeah, you too, Javier, yes.
And I'll also say, by focusing on, a thread throughout our whole program is environmental health. And, we've been working in this realm for decades at UNC. And so one thing we always do in our programming is think about environmental health, vulnerable populations, environmental justice, the value of bringing diverse voices to the table when it comes to making decisions and figuring out solutions. So these things won't be new to us, but they're now even more timely. And like you were saying, Brian, the youth are ready and ripe for kind of receiving this information and thinking about it. And just, it's all kind of coalescing. And I had a friend say to me the other day, like, if we can truly make Black Lives Matter, we can pretty much solve all of our other problems potentially related to climate change and climate justice. So it's really interesting to think about when there is equity for all, other things just start falling into place that are going to benefit us, both in terms of the pandemic, but also in terms of addressing climate change. And I think if we can help students see that, that can also be really valuable.
Yes, totally. Because if they see their power, they could hit the streets for all the issues, and they're all totally connected.
Yeah.
I put a petition in there. I put a petition in the chat. Anyone can sign, any age, any place, about the Duke monopoly, to ask people to not take Duke money. By the way, that's been going around for about a year, but they're always looking for more signatures. Right there in the chat.
Okay. Well, this has been a really nice discussion. We're happy that you all know about our youth program now and the research that we're doing around environmental health literacy and self-efficacy. Any final thoughts, words, Kathleen, Sarah, Emily?
Well, I'll just say thank you to Mike and Susan and Emily for getting Dana and I to do this, because I'll just speak for myself. I might have come in feeling like, oh, everybody knows what we do. Do we really need to do this? But this conversation and the ideas that people have shared and the connections that we've made together has been incredibly helpful to me. And I just appreciate your being here, being present, and sharing your ideas with us. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks everyone.
Great job.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you everybody. This talk has been recorded and we'll have it on our YouTube page. So if you want to share it later or rewatch it, or if there's other folks you think that would benefit from seeing it, please share with them. But thank you all for coming. It was a great discussion, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great job, you guys.
Thanks.
Nice to see everybody.
Thanks. Bye.
Yeah.
Thank you.